Hi guys, today's like goal is 10 likes. Let's start the episode simultaneously. Within the command chamber of the mystical tower, all the instructors were observing the students. Among them was also Vinci Morgue. According to the data displayed by the system, the current status of the participants revealed that out of 400 who initially entered, only 149 remained alive. The distribution of these survivors was as follows. The mystical tower had 46 from Boot Camp Vangian, closely followed by 45 from Lemura, with Colosio Academy trailing at just 2-3. The attention of the commander from Boot Camp Vangian fixated on the hologram of the mountain, a smug grin spreading across his face. His satisfaction stemmed from Colosio Academy's students who were already few in number, having suffered a devastating blow. Hanheim had just systematically eliminated their first-year students in large groups. The director of the Lemur, Hippolyte, began touching her chin, smiling softly, remarking that Hanheim appeared very formidable. The master of the mystical tower, Blue Whale, stroked his beard, extended his hand, and couldn't help but feel pleased. Finally, the arrogant know-it-all Hanheim had revealed his true nature. He believed that Colosio Academy had no luck whatsoever in this competition. Vinci Morgue looked down in silence, uncertain of what to say. Blue Whale's gaze fixed on him, and with a curious expression, he asked what Vinci Morgue was pondering so deeply. Lost in thought, Vinci Morgue stared at the hologram in silence. Deep in contemplation, he extended his hand and, with concern shining in his eyes, voiced the doubt that gnawed at him, feeling the burden of his role as host of the survival tournament. He questioned whether others truly believed that this map was safe for hosting the event. With an arrogant expression, Blue Whale questioned his meaning. Vinci Morgue looked again at the hologram and, with a serious tone, explained that the tower hadn't modeled the tournament site as an ordinary jungle. Instead, it was based on the deep, unreleased zones of the jungle. This meant that not only was the terrain more hostile, but the summoned magical beasts also grew progressively more dangerous, reaching levels beyond the students' capacity to handle. He recalled reports sent by the Morgue family years ago specifically about one of those unreleased zones where a level S magical beast had appeared. It was an event that caused significant casualties and destruction. His eyes widened with terror, as a terrible suspicion struck him. What if a beast of that magnitude appeared in the jungle during the tournament? Would the tower's system be able to operate correctly? Even more unsettling, he wondered if they were truly prepared to prevent a catastrophe of that scale. Blue Whale looked down and clarified that this was not news, but merely a rumor, something he'd also heard. He placed a hand over his face and explained that since that incident, no other witness had come forward. He emphasized that those spreading such rumors were members of the Morgue family, who openly opposed his tower. That's why, from the start, he didn't trust their words. He added that the beasts appearing on the tournament field were summoned to adapt to the students' abilities. Currently, the participants ranged from basic sword experts to fourth circle mages comparable to low-level graduates. Blue Whale then imagined Vikir, with eyes shining malevolently, explaining that there was a condition for this to occur. If someone possessed 7th circle level skills or higher, in other words, at the swordmaster level, they could summon beasts the system couldn't control. However, he insisted this was nearly impossible, or rather, entirely impossible. And in the unlikely event that an accident did happen, the solution was simple: suspend the competition. Meanwhile, Tutor Sancho, Piggy, and Bianca appeared in the tournament's waiting area. The tutor rubbed his head, looking embarrassed, while Piggy placed his hands on his head and started freaking out. Blue Whale told them not to worry. If a student's HP shield reached 0, they would be automatically teleported back to the waiting room. Because of this, he couldn't see what the problem was. With an arrogant expression, he stared at Vinci Morgue and questioned whether he was protesting just because there were few students from Colosio. Furious, Vinci Morgue stood up and demanded he stop spouting nonsense. Blue Whale turned his head slightly and made it clear that this was a gathering of the Empire's top mages. Both the Morgue family, known solely for their reputation, and Colosio Academy were fundamentally different. He clasped his hands and, with a smile, said it was a waste of time to worry about fantasies that probably wouldn't even happen. Hearing this, Vinci Morgue gritted his teeth, his eyes widening with anger. He knew it was impossible to reason with this old man. At the same time, in the forest, Vikir sat in front of a campfire, hands clasped, and with a curious look, asked if Tutor Piggy, Bianca, and Sancho had been eliminated. Sinclair, sitting nearby, nodded. She held her magic staff tightly, eyes filled with sorrow, revealing that Hanheim had attacked the tutors and Piggy without warning, just like the others. Vikir's eyes grew serious as he remembered his enemies. He recognized Hanheim as one of the great heroes from the era of devastation, but he also knew that even heroes from the same age could have vastly different powers. Sinclair felt fortunate to have found Vikir, but she was confused. She didn't understand why his HP remained intact. Our protagonist had 100 HP points. He stared at her silently. Granule, arms crossed, leaning against a tree, listened to their conversation. Sinclair's eyes brightened with joy, and she admitted that she got tired quickly losing HP just by running a bit through the forest. But Vikir, on the other hand, was truly incredible. Lost in his thoughts, Vikir remained silent. Granule clenched his teeth and widened his eyes with rage. He couldn't stand seeing them so close. He knew they were simply hunting beasts deep in the forest and maintaining their good condition and full HP. He wondered what was so impressive about that, believing he could do the same. His eyes turned serious as he grabbed several arrows, aiming his bow at Vikir. Seeing this, Vikir panicked, raised his arms, and shouted that he hadn't said anything wrong. Sinclair's attention was drawn to Granule, and she felt a little confused. The truth was, a tentacled monster was about to attack Granule. Without wasting any more time, Vikir fired his arrows. Granule ducked, closed his eyes, covered his head, and started screaming like a madman. The arrow struck the tentacles of the beast. Someone holding a magic staff was surprised by Vikir's instinct, despite using silence magic to hide their approach. Vikir had still sensed Sinclair and the others. Granule stood up and ran toward them. The student who launched the attack belonged to the Women's University. Lemira, with an arrogant look, thinking the Colossian students believed that hiding here would keep them safe. Nearby was a girl with a shield at 70 HP and an archer with 81 HP. She touched her hair confidently, pointing at them with her staff, calling them arrogant. She had 85 HP. It was nighttime, and one of them recognized Sinclair. Her eyes widened in surprise and confusion. The archer asked her friend if she really knew Sinclair, then stared at Sinclair with a serious expression, revealing that Sinclair was the infamous traitor. Despite passing first in Nemesis's entrance exam, she had ended up at Colossio Academy. The archer warned her not to say this in front of the president. Hearing this, Sinclair's eyes filled with fear and worry. Lovegood Merlin couldn't help but get furious, demanding Sinclair how she dared reject the Lemira, the Empire's top female academy, just to attend Colossio. Her eyes shone with arrogance as she questioned whether Sinclair had gone to Colossio for a trivial reason like romance. Mocking her further, she asked when handsome boys had appeared at Colossio. At that moment, her face turned red like a tomato, her attention fixed on Vikir. She was amazed, unable to understand how one face could embody nerdiness, tenderness, sensuality, and beauty all at once. She admitted he was totally her type. Our protagonist felt a little confused and began to drool at the thought of Vikir. The archer and her friend looked somewhat bewildered by her reaction. Suddenly, someone placed a hand on Vikir's face. She clenched her fist tightly, glaring with rage, and demanded that Lovegood Merlin stop staring at Vikir. Hearing this, Lovegood Merlin's eyes flashed with malice, and a murderous aura emanated from her body. Her friends panicked, sensing danger. She held her magic staff tightly, and tentacles began to emerge from her body. She couldn't believe Sinclair had just said that. She activated her powers, and soon, tentacles shot out from the ground. Vikir and Sinclair watched silently as her violence unfolded. Lovegood Merlin's eyes burned with fury. She screamed threats to kill Sinclair, and her summoned tentacles lunged toward her. Elsewhere, in the forest, several explosions erupted caused by Hanheim, who now had 83 HP, smiling arrogantly. He told his enemies to stop running and surrender immediately, as there was nothing a healer could do alone. Facing Dolores, who clenched her teeth and extended her hands to create a protective barrier, he made it clear she had no escape. Her eyes widened in fear as she saw she was surrounded. Hanheim approached her, eyes gleaming with malice, and assured her that if she fell, her academy would lose all chances of victory. The survival tournament would then be a victory for the mystical tower. Dolores panted heavily, but refused to give up. She knew she couldn't fall here. Suddenly, a swordsman appeared, ready to strike. His presence caught Hanheim's attention, leaving both confused. Ill as Bakira, with mana swirling around him and eyes shining with excitement. He urged Hanheim not to be so confident. Bakira swung his sword forcefully, attacking. Hanheim reacted quickly, summoning a barrier to block the strike. Gritting his teeth, he realized Bakira was a graduate. Bakira's eyes shone with joy, and, noticing Hanheim had reached Class 4, he pressed on, attacking again with all his might. His sword clashed against Hanheim's barrier. At the same time, the tentacles Lovegood Merlin summoned advanced rapidly toward Vikir. Just then, the Baskerville triplets cut the tentacles into pieces with their blades. Vikir prepared to shoot his bow, recognizing that this magic resembled what the Morgue's 3 flowers used, though this was a complex combination of 3 spells, requiring incredible focus. Despite the intense emotions, his eyes widened in fear as he sensed a strange mana. His gaze filled with terror. Vikir turned around. Crows began to fly through the forest, and he wondered about this strange energy. The ground started to tremble and crack. Hanheim looked confused, unsure of what was happening. Bakira gazed at the ground and said he had never heard of earthquakes in deep forests. Suddenly, something emerged from the earth, drawing everyone's attention. Their eyes widened with shock, fear, and surprise overtook them. Vikir and Sinclair's attention also fixated on it. They were confused. a gigantic spider emerged from the ground. Vikir's eyes widened again in surprise. The spider opened its mouth and roared. She was the queen of 8 legs. At the start of the chapter we are shown that the spider lady opened her mouth, her eyes blazing with fury, and decided to launch an attack. The Baskerville triplets swiftly moved at high speed, dodging her assaults. Staying composed, Visor remained calm. Sinclair gripped her magical staff with both hands, unable to suppress her fear. Meanwhile, Granule panicked. Lovegood Merlin stared silently at the madam, her eyes filled with terror. She had no idea what kind of creature she was facing. Seeing her expression, her friends panicked and urged her to react, insisting they should flee immediately. As Visor retreated along with the others, his gaze fixed on the madam and his eyes began to glow with seriousness. Realizing she was the source of the unease he had sensed since entering the arena, Visor began to recall a book, remembering that before his regression, stories about this madam were mere legends, passed down as horror tales. Only after extensive research was she officially recorded in the Imperial Bestiary as a magical beast, meaning that until then, no reliable eyewitness account existed. Even within the Magic Tower hosting the tournament, there were no precedents. Visor understood that this must be an unforeseen complication caused by his return. While Madam's eyes shimmered with malice, Visor silently stared at her. She attacked with one of her legs, which slowly extended toward Lovegood Merlin. As her leg inched closer, Merlin froze with fear, unsure of what to do. Meanwhile, her friends drew their weapons, ready to fight. Their eyes were full of terror. They couldn't move, unable to believe they might be eliminated without fighting back. Just before the attack could strike, their tank, a friend of theirs, stepped forward, using her shield to block the blow. But the disparity in strength was too great. She turned to Visor with a worried look and asked him to step aside. Hearing her plea, Lovegood Merlin snapped out of her shock, her eyes widening in surprise. Fortunately, she reacted quickly and moved out of the attack's path, causing Madam's leg to pass by her at high speed, destroying everything in its wake. Once Merlin turned around, her eyes widened with horror, her shock evident. Madame's attack was so powerful it caused Anna, her friend, to crash into a tree. Her shield shattered and lay broken on the ground, and Anna lost consciousness. Madame then carefully observed her target, saliva tingling at the corners of her mouth. Her eyes lit up with excitement. Thanks to her heightened senses, she detected the heat signature of other students hiding in the forest. Without hesitation, she charged toward them, passing by Visor and the others. Granule fell to his backside in shock and confusion. He couldn't believe it had gone somewhere else. He thought he was about to be eliminated. Visor, standing upright, clenched his fists and silently watched Madame. The boy wondered if it was heading toward where more students were gathered. His eyes glowed with concern. He couldn't help but worry about what the administration was doing at this moment. He knew they shouldn't allow an entity outside the designated parameters to participate in the tournament. Visor's thoughts were interrupted when Lovegood Merlin ran toward Anna, checking if she was all right. Visor turned to them, becoming somewhat curious. Anna was injured, covered in scratches, and her HP had dropped to 0. Lovegood Merlin's eyes widened in confusion and surprise. She couldn't understand why Anna hadn't been teleported to the waiting area, even though her HP was clearly depleted. Her friends' faces filled with fear. She panicked, unsure how they would escape this situation. She covered her mouth and started crying. Meanwhile, Lovegood Merlin fell to her knees, gazing at the ground silently, unsure of what to do. Granule approached him, extending his hand and asking what was happening, since, even if they had been eliminated, they should have been returned to the waiting room. He rubbed his head, growing frantic. According to him, this made no sense. If a beast had appeared that exceeded expectations, why wasn't the tournament being suspended? He wondered what the administration was doing right now. Visor remained calm, drawing his bow, and asked Granule to calm down. But Granule started shouting wildly, not wanting to die here. At that moment, someone moved through the bushes and saw them. It was Dors, Bakira, and Hohenheim. Bakira, with his sword resting on his shoulder, observed the group silently. Hohenheim, meanwhile, maintained a calm expression. Bakira's eyes widened with worry. He didn't know if they were okay. Inside the Magic Tower's control room, the hologram turned red. The Blue Whale and others panicked. They realized that although students' HP had dropped to 0, they weren't being teleported back. Since some were injured, they decided it was best to evacuate them immediately. Ben Yorg, full of concern, shouted at Blue Whale, demanding he stop the tournament. Blue Whale's eyes widened in fear and confusion. He couldn't believe a beast like Madame was in the forest. He wondered if everything claimed by the Morg family was true. He looked down, feeling confident that if the spider hadn't appeared, the Magic Tower might have won the tournament. Hearing this, Vinimore clenched his teeth tightly. Without wasting time, he got up sharply, rushing forward. With an angry expression, he grabbed Blue Whale by the collar and demanded the tournament be halted immediately, asking if he wanted everyone to die. Seeing Vincy Morg's determined attitude, Blue Whale was taken aback. With sincerity, he explained, that stopping the tournament was impossible. The appearance of such an entity, even for the magic tower, overwhelmed the system, causing a loss of control. Noticing they couldn't intervene, nor could the students escape, Benny Morg asked if there was a way to fix this. Blue Whale moved his finger, pointing at a bright spot on the hologram. He imagined Madam with shining eyes and explained that if this creature was eliminated from the battlefield, the tower's system would stabilize. Meanwhile, in the forest, Doris sat beside Anna, who was injured. Using her powers, she began to heal her. Luckily, as her shield dissipated, her injuries slightly improved. Her eyes sparkled with calmness. She turned to Loved Good Merlin and explained that Anna was only unconscious temporarily, and if she rested, she would recover. Loved Good Merlin sat beside her, resting her hands on her knees, gazing at the ground with a worried expression. She felt relieved that the situation was somewhat under control, but her focus immediately turned to where Madame was heading. While Madame attacked other students, Doris kept her eyes fixed on her, hoping they hadn't suffered harm. As she tried to understand what was happening, Visor, standing behind them, silently reflected. His gaze was downward, filled with guilt. He remembered that the eight-legged Madame was classified as a disaster-level threat, a destructive force capable of annihilating nations, whose mere existence threatened the world. He knew this Madame was not the same as the one encountered outside the magic tower. She no longer used her poison, and all her eyes had disappeared, indicating she now had blind spots. Her once impenetrable body was now riddled with holes. He suspected she had been summoned with distortions, perhaps a hybrid of the past Madame and a dead version, existing in a twisted reality. Visor lifted his head, his focus on someone in front of him. It was Lovegood Merlin, seated and silently watching the ground. Bakira and Hohenheim remained silent, unsure what to do. Our boy clenched his fist tightly, knowing that even recognizing these differences, they were far from capable of defeating a weakened Madame. He understood they needed to recover their resolve first. To prevent more casualties and fulfill their mission, he felt compelled to use his power. Just then, someone decided to confront Madame. Hearing this, our boy snapped out of his trance, eyes widening in surprise. Lovegood Merlin grabbed her staff and stood up. She knew she couldn't stay here in despair. Her complacency had nearly cost her a friend's life. She was determined to seek revenge and protect those still remaining. Her eyes shone with resolve, clearly showing her role as president of the MCRA Student Council. Someone forcefully drove their sword into the ground, asserting that Lovegood Merlin's determination suited the students of Boot Camp Van. It was Bakira, with a confident smile. He decided to help her face Madame. Worried, Dollars stepped forward to support her, knowing they couldn't sacrifice the students here. Lovegood Merlin turned away, lost in thought. Nearby Hohenheim stood quietly. Everyone's attention was on him, unsure if he would assist. Bakira, honest even if reluctant to admit it, knew they needed Hohenheim's strength. Hearing this, Hohenheim's lips curled into a smile. Under the moonlight, he adjusted his glasses and, with confidence, said that although it was bothersome, he would accept a temporary alliance just this once for the tower's victory. The figure, watching them closely, remembered how even during times of chaos, they had been the true heroes, fighting valiantly. A smile appeared on his face. Visor caught the attention of the triplets, making their eyes widen with curiosity. Calmly, Visor began to analyze the situation. His eyes shone with seriousness as he ordered them to transmit a message to others. They must learn how to defeat Madame Eightlegs. Meanwhile, Madame was relentlessly pursuing students fleeing in terror. Their eyes were filled with panic and despair. One student tripped and fell face first. Her friend, overwhelmed with fear, reached out desperately, revealing she had twisted her ankle and begged for help. Hearing this, the student hesitated, unsure what to do. Without a second thought, she turned her back, closed her eyes, and fled. Asking forgiveness, Madame extended her legs to attack the girl, her eyes full of malice. Just as she was about to strike, someone launched a fire spell, narrowly saving the girl. The explosion created a thick cloud of smoke. Madame's eyes glowed, and when the smoke cleared, she remained unscathed. The spellcaster was Hohenheim. He stared at her, preparing to cast another spell. Realizing his fire magic hadn't caused any damage, even though insect monsters should be vulnerable to it, he felt a surge of excitement. Flames erupted from his staff, and his eyes sparkled with determination. Behind him appeared Doors, Sinclair, and Granule, ready to face the deadly Madame. The spider Madame opened its enormous maw and let out a deafening roar, echoing through the battlefield. Hohenheim quickly extended his hand, summoning a glowing magic circle beneath his feet. In a flash, several bursts of fiery magic shot toward the beast, lighting up the area with intense flames. Behind him, Doris and Sinclair prepared to support him, readying their own skills for the fight. Hohenheim's eyes shone with unwavering determination. He clenched his teeth and focused, refusing to give in easily. Meanwhile, Hibro drew his sword and charged forward, moving swiftly toward the beast. Sinclair grabbed her magic staff, her gaze confident and steady, ready to follow the others into battle. Doris silently observed the monstrous spider, puzzled by its overwhelming power. How could such a creature be so formidable? Hohenheim was momentarily confused when he realized that this magical beast was immune to his fire magic. Not only that, but it was an insect-type creature, something that defied his expectations. Hebro, turning to him with a calm but serious expression, explained, "Your flames won't work here. Normal fire won't cause significant damage. Unless you use nether hellfire, your magic is useless against it. And its exoskeleton is incredibly resistant. The attacks just bounce off." His gaze turned serious as he began to analyze Madame's weak points. He noted that, although its legs were less armored than its main body, they possessed a strange regenerative ability. If cut off, they would grow back, often multiplying in number. Its only real vulnerabilities at this moment were the already torn-out eyes and the patches of armor that had been stripped away. As Middleborough and Lober's eyes gleamed with resolve, they surged forward, weapons ready. Behind them, Vikir, Good Merlin, and Bakira followed closely, prepared for the assault. Hebro explained to Hohenheim that although his magic couldn't directly harm Madame, it could serve as a distraction, drawing its attention so that the others could strike its weak points. "If I can attract its focus with my magic," Hebro said, "the Vangian group will have a chance to attack the exposed spots." Hohenheim nodded gratefully, asking, "How do you know all this? Have you faced Madame before?" Hebro looked away nervously, sweat beading on his forehead. He quickly fabricated a lie, claiming, "I analyzed it during a past encounter. What I told you is the result of that analysis." Hohenheim hesitated, feeling a flicker of doubt. Can we really follow this plan and succeed? He wondered. Suddenly, Madame opened its mouth wide, unleashing a mighty roar. Hebro confirmed that this was the only way to defeat it, by exploiting its weaknesses and distracting it long enough for the others to strike. The beast stretched out its sharp legs, advancing rapidly. Hohenheim's eyes widened in alarm as he saw its approach. Panic flooded him. He knew he wouldn't be able to hold its attention for long. Loved Good Merlin was the first to act. She stepped forward, raising her magic staff, mana swirling from its tip. Her eyes sparkled with confidence and hope. With a determined smile, she spun her staff, summoning a magic circle on the ground. From it, thick vines erupted, coiling upward in a furious rush. Toward Madame, the spider, confused by the sudden onslaught, threw itself into attack mode, swinging its razor-sharp legs wildly. The vines struck its abdomen, causing a piercing scream of agony. Loved Good Merlin's gaze remained steadfast as she continued to channel her magic, ordering the others to attack. Hearing her command, Middleborough and Lober drew their swords, their determination burning bright. They leaped onto Madame's back, aiming for its vulnerable spots. Bakira and the Baskerville triplets landed atop its armored abdomen, mana emanating from their bodies as they prepared to strike. Bakira gripped his sword tightly, eyes blazing with fury. Ready to attack, Bakira shouted, unleashing a surge of powerful mana. They launched their assault, creating a thick curtain of smoke that obscured the battlefield. As the smoke began to clear, the group descended to the ground, cautious and alert. Knowing that the fight was far from over, Bakira, eyes sharp, observed the battlefield. His expression turned serious. "With so much smoke, I can't tell if it's dead or alive," he muttered, gripping his sword tightly. Hebro's eyes widened in confusion. Despite feeling confident that his attack had struck true, Bakira's uncertainty made him hesitate. Suddenly, a massive shadow loomed overhead. Something gigantic was approaching fast. Bakira and the triplets stared up in shock and fear, their faces reflecting the gravity of the situation. Hohenheim, Doris, Sinclair, and Grenouille all turned to look, their eyes widening in terror as the shadow grew larger, casting darkness over the battlefield. Loved Good Merlin, trembling, looked up with fear in her eyes. Madame's legs, battered and torn, steadied as the spider rose to its full height. Its eyes burned with rage as it roared furiously and fixed its gaze on the group. Without hesitation, Madame charged, its sharp legs slicing through the air with deadly precision. Hohenheim swiftly created a barrier around everyone, a glowing shield that shimmered with protective magic, attempting to block the beast's ferocious assault. Madame's attacks tore into the ground, causing it to crack and shatter beneath their feet. Bakira and the triplets scrambled to avoid the destruction, their movements frantic but coordinated. Middleborough clenched his fists, teeth gritted, as he watched the overwhelming power of Madame. His eyes widened in fear. How could they stand against such a monster? Night had fallen, and Vikir had met with the Baskerville triplets earlier. His face was filled with confusion and concern. By following Vikir's plan, he questioned, "Do you really think we can kill Madame?" The triplets silently observed him, their expressions unreadable. Vikir turned his back to them, voice calm but resolute. "It's impossible," he admitted, "but we already know what it means to face Madame." Hearing this, the triplets' eyes widened in surprise. Bakira's hand trembled slightly as he tried to process the grim reality. Meanwhile, Hohenheim sat trembling, fear gripping his heart. The sight of Anna's body lying motionless nearby haunted him. Loved Good Merlin sat beside her, holding her hand tightly. Soon, Anna stirred, pushing herself up slowly. Her friend's attention snapped toward her, Concern etched on their faces. Lovegood Merlin turned her back, eyes shining with determination. She looked at Anna and softly asked her to take care of herself. Vikir's voice cut through the tense silence, explaining that the greatest threat wasn't just the monster, it was the strength to fight on while witnessing comrades fall. That was why they had chosen this group. Even knowing the odds were against them, they would fight tirelessly until the end. Suddenly, Madame's massive legs swung toward Lovegood Merlin. She quickly extended her hands, summoning a barrier that absorbed the attack. Her face contorted with effort. She clenched her teeth, overwhelmed by the monster's power. Tears welled in her eyes, realizing how formidable Madame truly was. At that moment, someone placed a hand on the ground. Red mana erupted from their palm, spreading across the battlefield. The ground exploded in a violent burst of energy, halting Madame's attack. Vikir's eyes widened in disbelief and confusion. He recognized that Mona familiar and potent, realizing its significance. Vikir turned to the triplets, a serious expression on his face. When I give the signal, all of you attack together, he ordered. That's the only way to defeat Madame. The triplets nodded silently, understanding the gravity of the moment. Vikir raised one finger, solemnly revealing the plan. This is our last chance. Attack with everything you've got. Following his instructions, the group prepared themselves, mana swirling, weapons ready, hearts pounding with resolve. Doris applied a powerful light buff to Hohenheim. Sinclair focused her energy, eyes sharp. Lovegood Merlin summoned vines once more, their tendrils creeping across the ground. Hohenheim extended his hand, summoning a blazing magic circle that crackled with energy. The flames surged upward, ready to strike. The Baskerville triplets and Bakira positioned themselves above, prepared to deliver the killing blow. Vikir drew back his bow, aiming at Madame's vulnerable legs. Imbuing the arrow with his mana, his eyes shined with unwavering confidence. He knew this shot could turn the tide. He released the arrow, the force so mighty it shattered the ground beneath him. The shot streaks toward Madame, cutting through the air with deadly precision. The arrow struck its legs, causing the beasts to roar in pain and fury. Seizing the opportunity, Bakira and the others launched their attacks, weapons flashing as they aimed for the beast's exposed weaknesses. Hohenheim summoned a colossal flame, unleashing it directly onto Madame's abdomen, igniting a blazing inferno that shook the battlefield. This was the final stand. The battle raged on as the fate of all hung in the balance.
The sun had already risen, and once the smoke curtain dissipated, Madame's corpse was visible lying on the ground. It bore numerous cuts across its abdomen, and all its legs had been severed. As the wind blew gently, Lovegood Merlin silently observed the corpse. Granuel, exhausted, collapsed onto his backside. Sinclair, holding her magic staff, and Doris both widened their eyes in shock and relief. Meanwhile, on the other side, Hohenheim couldn't help but smile faintly. Middleborough knelt on the ground, gasping heavily, while Lowborough, with hands resting on his knees, was catching his breath. Highborough lifted his head, his gaze fixed seriously on Madame's body. Bakira, standing at the front, stared silently at the fallen calamity. As the smoke screen faded, Vikir's eyes, which had shot a mana-imbued arrow to weaken Madame, shone with seriousness. Pride flickered within him. Not long after, Madame's corpse began to vanish, and with her disappearance, the system of the magic tower finally returned to normal. As soon as the system stabilized, the tournament concluded, and all students were immediately teleported to the waiting room. Vikir looked at his hands with curiosity, unsure of what was happening. Sinclair's eyes widened in disbelief. She was speechless. In front of them, Piggy, Sancho, Tudor, and Bianca ran toward them with proud smiles. Vikir and Sinclair's attention fixed on these familiar faces, relieved to reunite with friends and teachers who had waited for them. Piggy threw his arms wide and leapt to hug Vikir. Vikir, feeling confused and surprised, was caught off guard as Piggy embraced him and began to cry. Shocked, Vikir's eyes widened, overwhelmed by the unexpected display of emotion. The fact that no one was seriously injured amid the chaos was undoubtedly a blessing, truly a miracle. The University League ranking was updated, revealing the top 10 heroes who made this miracle possible. In first place was Hohenheim, followed by Garejo Bakira in second. Lovegood Merlin secured third place. Dolores Lonquotes was fourth, and the Baskerville triplets claimed 5th to 7th. Vikir ranked 8th, Sinclair 9th, and Granuel de Leviathan finished 10th. Vikir imagined the triplets with crossed arms and shining eyes. The fact that these first-year students entered the top 10, all of whom fought against Madame, surprised everyone. Moreover, it was confirmed that Madame was an S-class entity, an astonishing feat considering that even the extra eyes monitoring the field had collapsed due to system overload. It was unbelievable that 10 students, with a maximum power level barely reaching the 4th circle or low-grade rank, had managed to hunt down an S-class beast. Vikir recalled the battle against Madam, with its evil, piercing eyes. Many doubts stirred, but the students' unified explanation was that the ground suddenly exploded, creating a fleeting opportunity, and their attack struck Madam's weak points. Because Madam's appearance was considered a system error, the official conclusion was that their victory was merely a fortunate coincidence. Blue Whale lowered his head, gazing at the ground with a mournful expression. Standing atop the stage before the gathered students, he looked regretful and sorrowful. With a heavy voice, he promised to fulfill his duties until the end of the tournament, then resign from his position as the tower's lord. With a tone full of remorse, the highest authority of the Magic Tower, known as Whitebeard Blue Whale, publicly apologized, and the situation began to settle into a phase of resolution. A few hours later, night fell. Someone grabbed a mug of beer, raising in a toast to Sinclair and the others for making it into the top 10. It was Tudor, who stood up with a smile. The others seated nearby watched him silently. The Van John students' attention was drawn to him, their eyes shining with curiosity. Bianca crossed her arms and, with a nervous expression, told Tudor that it wasn't the time for such celebrations and asked him to sit down. Tudor looked somewhat confused, turned toward her, and with a forced smile, thought she was right. Meanwhile, Sancho's eyes shone with calm as he turned to the group and said that although they all returned safely from this chaotic, life-threatening ordeal, facing an S-class creature had left them with deep, traumatic scars that haunted them. Not far from them, at another table, sat friends of Lovegood Merlin. One of them covered her face and began to cry. Noticing this, another friend placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Sancho closed his eyes and couldn't help but smile. Then he grabbed the beer jug and questioned why they shouldn't raise their glasses to honor the heroes who fought Madam. Vikir showed no emotion, remaining silent. On the other side, Sinclair's eyes filled with joy, and she blushed faintly. Everyone raised their mugs and toasted. Sancho and the others congratulated Sinclair and Vikir, recognizing the impressive feat of having first-year students occupying 8th and 9th place in the overall ranking. While the celebration continued, a student in the Magic Tower Academy uniform approached them. He coughed politely, drawing Sinclair's attention. Her curiosity piqued as she looked at him. The student was from the Magic Tower. He began to touch his head, then, confirming their identities, sincerely thanked them for saving him earlier in the tournament, feeling it was right to greet them. Sinclair smiled and replied that she was glad they weren't hurt. Vikir, silent, looked down. The student touched his forehead, pointed at them, and with a sincere tone, expressed surprise that commoners, probably without proper education, could save nobles. Sinclair's eyes widened in confusion. Was this guy crazy? Meanwhile, Vikir paid him no mind. Bianca suddenly placed her hand on the table, grabbed the student by the collar, her eyes shining with rage, and demanded to know what he had just said and whether background truly mattered when saving someone. The student clenched his teeth, furious and nervous, and quickly explained it was a misunderstanding. He just meant that being commoners might have made their task harder. Sancho pulled Bianca back, urging her to calm down, and she reluctantly let go. The others hurried to leave, feeling relieved. Bianca, still furious, told Sancho to let her go, arguing that those guys didn't even deserve saving. No one paid the student's words much attention, except Sinclair, who looked down with a sad expression. Vikir noticed her reaction. She seemed unusually somber when the topic of origin came up, unlike her usual cheerful self. Piggy closed his eyes, clapped to get everyone's attention, and with a smile, tried to change the subject. He recalled that the first round of the tournament had ended, and only those in the top 10 advanced to the second. His eyes sparkled as he revealed that the next phase involved visiting the imperial family and the 7 great houses to complete missions, earning artifacts managed by all 4 universities. Vikir's eyes widened in surprise. Bianca placed her hand on Tudor's shoulder, pointed to herself, and curiously mentioned that to avoid controversy, students couldn't choose missions from their own family houses. For example, she couldn't pick a mission from the Divine Bow family, and Tudor couldn't pick from the Sunspear family. Tudor nodded, explaining that since Vikir and Sinclair had no affiliations, it didn't matter. Sinclair clenched her fists, upset. Vikir, arms crossed, looked at her confused. Bianca raised a finger, warning that there was one rule they must follow: never choose the Baskerville family. Most who did had failed or never returned. Vikir stayed silent, contemplating, while Sinclair's concern grew. Bianca asked with a smile which house they would choose. Vikir looked up, eyes wide in shock. He didn't know what to say. The next day, as sunset approached, the train departed. Vikir sat in one of the carriages, clutching an envelope, an assignment from the Iron Sword family, containing a mission of maximum difficulty. He read it silently, eyes shining as he remembered their expressions when he chose this house. Though outwardly it seemed different, deep down, the public perception of the Baskerville was intense. Bianca's hand covered her face, furious, while Tudor and the others looked shocked, knowing the family's obsession with blood. Vikir leaned against the seat, contemplating the landscape in silence. The second round mission was the final step before facing Decorabia, the seventh corpse. Success meant obtaining Hugo's seal on the scroll. But first, he had to check something else. He reached into his pocket, pulled out another letter, and examined it carefully. It was a note Hugo had given him, containing instructions on how to become a sword master. Despite thinking about it, he couldn't understand why Hugo would help him, especially if Hugo knew about his true power. Vikir looked at the letter and sank into thought. He remembered Hugo's past, the hatred, contempt, and thirst for revenge, wondering if Hugo had silently observed where his strength was heading. As he was lost in thought, Hugo's face suddenly appeared before him, completely different from before. Hugo now sported pigtails, clasped his hands, and smiled warmly upon seeing Vikir. Confused, Vikir asked why Hugo looked like that. Hugo chuckled, grabbing his ponytail, and explained that Pomerian had braided his hair. She was a prodigy of the Baskerville family. After all, Vikir noticed that Hugo's office had changed. It was filled with Pomerian's toys. Hugo mentioned that Pomerian was waiting for Vikir, but she was sleepy, so Barrymore had taken her to sleep. His eyes sparkled with joy, knowing that although Pomerian was past the age for such things, Hugo wanted her to enjoy childhood, something she hadn't experienced before. Vikir looked down, speechless. He placed the envelope on the table and mentioned that he had received Hugo's letter through Osiris, but he still didn't understand Hugo's motives. Hugo's attention turned to the envelope as Vikir opened it. It contained instructions on how to become a sword master. Vikir couldn't quite grasp Hugo's intentions. If Hugo had discovered his true power, this made sense, but he wasn't sure. Vikir lowered his head and asked Hugo when he had realized that he was hiding his true strength. Hugo closed his eyes thoughtfully and explained that upon reaching the highest realm, one gains the ability to perceive things that ordinary people cannot. He rested his hand on the table and added that there are sensations and truths that can be felt with the senses even without seeing them. He knew Vikir was aware of this. As Vikir listened, memories of his past flooded his mind. Hatred, contempt, and an intense thirst for revenge. He wondered if Hugo had simply observed in silence, aware of where his growing power was leading him. Lost in his thoughts, Vikir was momentarily distracted. Sensing this, Hugo caught his attention. His eyes widened with curiosity, and with a cheerful tone, Hugo remarked that he had been so absorbed in his own thoughts that he hadn't noticed until now. He pointed out that Vikir's uniform suited him well and asked whether he was enjoying life at the academy. Vikir was taken aback, unsure of what to say or how to respond. He remained silent for a moment. Then a gentle smile crept across his face. That night, Vikir felt a deep sense of happiness. Until then, he had always looked up to Hugo as a master, both from the perspective of a loyal student and as a family patriarch. But on this day, for the first time, Hugo looked at Vikir as his son, and that realization touched him profoundly. Night had fallen, and the stars shimmered brightly overhead, casting a gentle glow across the vast sky. Under this celestial canopy, Hugo turned to Vikir with a glint of excitement in his eyes. "I have good news to tell you," he announced softly, a smile playing on his lips. The two began to walk down the dimly lit hallway, their footsteps echoing softly. Vikir's curiosity grew with each step. What could this good news be? Hugo's eyes sparkled with joy as he nodded affirmatively. With a calm but proud expression, he revealed, "I've named you Senator." The words hung in the air for a moment, heavy with significance. Vikir's eyes widened in disbelief, his jaw dropping in shock. He couldn't quite believe what he had just heard. His mind raced to process the enormity of the title. The rank of senator was no small matter. It was equivalent to the status of a count in the noble hierarchy, a position wielding true power within a noble house. Above such a rank were only the patriarchs and the main heads of the family. Vikir's gaze fell to the ground, trying to remain composed. He knew that this was more than just a title. It was a symbol of influence and authority. Hugo, meanwhile, turned toward him with a serene expression, a gentle smile touching his face. He nodded once more, confirming his decision. A senator is practically the real power within the noble house, Hugo explained softly, and beyond that, only the patriarch himself. Hugo's mind drifted into thought, his hand resting on his chin as he carefully reviewed nearly a century of family history and lineage. Vikir was the youngest person ever to hold the title of senator, an unprecedented achievement. Without hesitation, he placed his hand over his chest, bowed his head respectfully to Hugo, and expressed his gratitude, promising that he would do his utmost to fulfill his duties. Hugo's face lit up with pride, his eyes shining with happiness at his son's response. Vikir, however, looked down, a faint sadness flickering across his features. The image of Sendai, Wendy, Chihuahua, and Minnie Pin floated into his mind. Visions of friends and loved ones, memories intertwined with the responsibilities and privileges of his new rank. The title of senator came with many privileges, but the greatest was the power to appoint advisors freely, and he already had some candidates in mind. Turning to Hugo, Vikir spoke in a calm, measured voice. "I've heard that lately. Everyone's been having trouble because of Pomerian's whims," he said quietly. Hugo's hand trembled slightly. He looked away, memories flooding his mind. Raising a child had always been a delicate process, and yet the happiness his granddaughter Pomerian brought him far outweighed any hardship. Still, concern gnawed at his heart. Vikir's attention shifted to Hugo, surprise and confusion evident on his face. He hadn't expected to hear such words. Hugo's gaze fell to the ground, and his expression was heavy with mixed emotions. Later that evening, Hugo approached Pomerian, who was reading a book quietly in her room. With a gentle, kind smile, Hugo knelt beside her. "Would you like Grandpa to play with you?" he asked softly. But Pomerian, cold and distant, shook her head without looking up. "I have to read this book," she replied. "You can play alone." Hugo's eyes filled with sadness at her cold response. He revealed that recently, her request for him to spend time with her had significantly decreased. He watched her, feeling helpless as she secluded herself in her corner, lost in her books. Hugo gently grabbed a strand of his hair braid, staring at the ribbon he wore, something she had made for him long ago. He hadn't untied it, afraid that if he did, he might lose her attention forever. He knew, deep down, that if Pomerian hadn't known Vikir was coming, she wouldn't have left her room at all. Vikir's eyes widened in surprise and concern. He realized the situation was more serious than he thought. His heart ached for Hugo, sensing how worried he was. Hugo placed a hand on his nose, closed his eyes, and let out a long sigh. He only hoped that Pomerian hadn't already reached adolescence, worried that her innocence might be slipping away. Suddenly, piercing screams erupted from Pomerian's room. Both Vikir and Hugo sprang into action, alert and tense. What was happening? They moved swiftly, not knowing what danger might be lurking. With eyes shining with concern, Hugo pushed open the door. Inside, Pomerian sat peacefully on the floor, a gentle smile on her face. She was not in danger at all. Instead, she was engrossed in reading one of her favorite books, surrounded by a mountain of open tomes. Her love for books was evident, each one a treasure in her little world. Hugo exhaled in relief and crouched down, his face softening as he told Pomerian that her grandfather had arrived. He asked what she had found so exciting. Vikir watched her with a joyful expression, heart warmed by her innocence. Hugo bent to pick her up, but she ran to him, wrapping her arms around his neck and asking shyly, "Why did it take you so long to come?" "I missed you." Hugo's eyes widened with a mixture of affection and sadness as he saw her cling to Vikir, ignoring him for the moment. She looked up at him and confidently declared, "I'm always waiting for Vikir." Her words warmed his heart, But at the same time, a pang of loneliness struck him. She no longer paid much attention to Hugo. Then, she opened one of her books, revealing a picture of a magnificent tree, the Tree of Spirits. She explained she wanted it. Vikir's gaze fixated on the picture. This wasn't just any tree. It was the legendary Tree of Spirits, said to be planted deep within the enemy's flood in the Black Mountains, in the White Salt Desert. It was a mana tree, rooted in the heart of the wizard, fed by the karma of souls, its seed requiring countless deaths to germinate. The fruits of this tree could grant immense power from spirits that had once served as its fertilizer. Vikir studied the image carefully, his mind flooded with awe and surprise. He recognized the Tree of Spirits, a mythic entity only spoken of in legends and stories. Was Palmyrian truly searching for such a legendary artifact among all the books she read? Her tender expression as she showed him the picture confirmed that her desire was genuine, perhaps driven by her innate talent in black magic. It was clear she felt a destined pull toward that mysterious tree. Before Vikir could decide what to do, Hugo suddenly stood up, catching his attention. Both Palmyrian and Vikir turned toward him, their faces puzzled. Hugo's eyes burned with a fierce determination as he stared at Vikir. "I don't know what it is," he said sharply, "but if Palmyrian desires it, you must bring it back, no matter what it takes. That is an order. The mission is clear. Obtain the Tree of Spirits." Vikir's mind reeled. This was no simple task. The Tree of Spirits was a legendary, almost mythical object, an artifact shrouded in mystery and peril. But he understood the importance. It was a mission from the Iron Bloodsword family, and he accepted it without hesitation. A few days later, Vikir found himself on the western front of the flood of the enemy Black Mountains, at height 207. He moved cautiously through the thick bushes, his mind preoccupied. According to the legend, the Tree of Spirits was located in a region that was mostly a white salt desert, an area with little to no life. But he doubted its existence. Information on the tree was scarce. Many considered it a myth, a relic from an ancient era. Vikir extended his hand, focusing on the Beelzebub sword. His past experiences with the sword had shown him that even the most legendary objects could be real if one believed strongly enough. He sighed deeply, determination hardening in his eyes. Suddenly, he felt a sharp, strange sensation in his neck. He adjusted his hood, ready for anything. Vikir let out a deep sigh, frustration evident in his expression. Inside his clothes, Madame's offspring, the tiny spider, was seething with fury. She was furious, trembling with rage, her tiny legs twitching as she scowled. Vikir felt a surge of confusion and irritation. How long did she plan to keep acting like this? His gaze softened slightly, but he quickly reminded her, "During the last exam, your unexpected actions put everyone in danger. That's why I kept you inside the ring's barrier, to prevent any accidents during the contempt for death contest." The little spider's fury only intensified. She hissed and flicked her tiny legs in protest, clearly upset. Vikir absent-mindedly reached up, touching his cheek as memories flooded back. The moment the students had fought against Madame Spider. Of course, he was the cause of that chaos, and he didn't have much to say about it now. Soon after, Vikir arrived at Malater, the infamous salt desert. He began to observe carefully, noticing several decomposing animal corpses scattered across the scorched landscape. Crouching down, he reached out to touch the salt. Instantly, his hand weakened, as if all the moisture within him was being greedily absorbed by the crystalline surface. His eyes widened in surprise, just as he had suspected. The salt was draining his water at an alarming rate. Without hesitation, he withdrew his hand, but a flicker of realization lit up his face. His body's moisture was rapidly diminishing. Vikir's mind drifted into thought, recalling the history of this cursed place. The Malater Desert had been born long ago, when the tears of an evil god dried up and vanished. The land, parched and barren, absorbed all moisture, leaching life from everything that dared to enter. Over the centuries, countless creatures had perished here, turned into mummies by the desert's relentless hunger. His gaze fixed on his hand, now dry and cracking. Despite the legend that the Tree of Spirits was somewhere within this desert, Vikir finally understood why no one had ever found it. The truth was, no ordinary person or magical beast could survive crossing this wasteland. They would die of dehydration before reaching their goal. He pulled his hood down slightly, and a determined glint shone in his eyes. Focusing his energy, he invoked the blessings of the river Styx and the regenerative power of the swamp merman. In an instant, the water that had been drained from his hand was restored, an astonishing feat made possible by his mastery of magic. With renewed confidence, Vikir descended deeper into the salt desert, setting his sights on his destination. Hours passed, more than 2, yet he pressed on steadily. Suddenly, a strange sensation in his left knee snapped him back to reality. He paused, adjusting his hood, and his eyes sharpened with alertness. He had suspected as much. Relying solely on the information from the book was a mistake. If he continued down this path blindly, he might not even make it out of the desert alive. Just then, his gaze caught something unexpected, a flicker of movement, a flickering shadow in the distance. His eyes widened in surprise, his heart pounding with anticipation and caution. His eyes sharpened as he realized. Relying solely on the book's content was a mistake. If he continued this way, he might never leave the desert alive. Then, unexpectedly, a massive tornado materialized before him. A fierce sandstorm swirling violently, with no warning. He cursed silently, bewildered by how swiftly it had appeared. His plan to evade the storm was failing. The tornado drew closer, relentless and deafening. Vikir's expression hardened. With resolve, he ordered the tiny spider hiding inside his clothes not to come out until he gave the signal, warning her of the danger. She trembled with fear, obeying his command and hiding further inside his clothes. Knowing he had to fight back, Vikir drew the Beelzebub sword, channeling his mana into it. He understood that to survive this storm, he needed to counter it with a stronger force. He concentrated and unleashed Technique 7 of the Baskervilles, swinging his sword forcefully toward the tornado. A brilliant slash cut through the storm, slowly forcing it back. The storm lashed at him, causing small wounds and blood to seep from his face. His pain was sharp, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to give in. The attack succeeded. Soon, the violent tornado dissipated, leaving behind broken glasses and torn clothing. Vikir clenched his fists, furious and exhausted. He hadn't even seen the Tree of Spirits yet, and already he was greeted with such hostility. The tiny spider inside his clothes trembled with fear. Vikir's eyes searched the aftermath, hopeful that she was still safe. He looked at her, a small smile on his face, and asked softly, "Now that it's over, you can come out. Why were you hiding?" Before he could receive an answer, his gaze was drawn to a monstrous figure, a creature with razor-sharp teeth, glaring at him with feral intensity. His eyes widened in shock and fear. Standing before him was something utterly terrifying. The creature's presence was overwhelming, and Vikir instinctively moved to stand his ground, sensing imminent danger. His eyes flashed with surprise and confusion. The tiny spider, trembling inside his clothes, had become even more fearful. They stood at the mouth of what looked like a massive, ancient corpse, an enormous, fallen monster, its carcass a testament to the deadly landscape. Vikir was at a loss. What was this place? What was this creature? The scene was surreal, as if the very ground had become a battlefield of legends and nightmares. Vikir was stunned, initially believing he was facing a genuine monster, but in reality, the creature's body had been sliced into pieces scattered across the area. The creature was a basilisk, an S-rank threat creature, also known as the Dragon of the Sand River. With a length of 50 meters, it was regarded as a terrifying hybrid of dragon and demon. Its last sighting was on the 10th crest of the Black Mountains. Its breath could knock birds from the sky, and the patches of land where its scaled body had crawled remained desolate deserts for 50 years. The mere existence of such a being was catastrophic, an entity that no spear, sword, or magic could truly eliminate. The little spider's eyes brimmed with fear, and she couldn't help but tremble. Sensing her distress, Vikir gently petted her and, with a calm and reassuring expression, told her there was nothing to fear. It was just a corpse, already lifeless. Despite being with Vikir, the little spider's fear persisted. The boy silently gazed at the corpse, lost in thought. Vikir's mind drifted to images of Madam, with eyes gleaming with malice, and a member of the Below tribe. He recalled that before his regression, during the era of destruction, the basilisk had been one of the 3 great calamities, collectively called the 3 disasters for beyond. It was an existence shrouded in mystery, with no trace of its form until it suddenly revealed itself. Vikir had always believed it was simply hiding somewhere. He emerged from the monster's maw and began to silently circle the area. It was hard to believe that the creature had fallen in such a pitiful manner. His gaze then fixed on a strange tree nearby. The basilisk possessed an extraordinary regenerative ability, greater even than that of the swamp nut. The fact that it had been cornered and killed was far more significant than it appeared. A wind suddenly picked up, signaling an approaching sandstorm. While the small spider burrowed into his clothes for safety, Vikir's expression turned serious as he stared at the tree. This suggested that something, or someone, had the power to kill an S-class beast with near-immortal regenerative capabilities. The place itself felt ominous, as if cloaked in a chilling aura. There was a higher-level space-time distortion magic present, more complex than that of the magic tower or Andromaeus' barrier. Vikir decided to investigate further. He approached the tree and thought it was time to open the door. Slowly, he began to push it open, allowing sunlight to pierce the gloom inside. His eyes shone with determination as he fully opened the dusty door, one that hadn't been opened in a long time, making him one of the few brave enough to enter. Suddenly, a surge of powerful, strange mana shot toward Vikir, causing his eyes to widen in shock. A formidable mana energy emanated from within the space. Vikir clenched his fist tightly, raising it before his face, his gaze turning serious. Recognizing the danger, the little spider fixed her eyes on something, surprised. Vikir then looked down, a confident smile forming on his lips. It was clear he had detected mana from an unfathomable dimension. He knew he had arrived at the right place. Once the door was completely open, Vikir stepped inside. The floor was strewn with swords, and before him sat a man on a throne, clad in black armor with his sword stuck into the ground. He was the source of that intense mana. This was the Tree of Spirits. Legend said that the great master of dark arts had planted it deep within the flood of the Black Mountains, in the White Salt Desert. It was a mana tree that rooted itself in the mage's mind, growing by feeding on karma from souls. Its seed would germinate amid countless deaths, and those who ate its fruit would gain power from spirits that served as its fertilizer. With sunlight filtering in, the man exuded a serene expression as he approached the throne. Vikir's gaze was drawn to the tip of one of the swords, which pointed not at the ground but toward the sky. He wondered if this place was somehow connected to Baskerville. After a few moments of silence, Vikir approached the knight, studying him intently, pondering whether he was the master of this tree. The atmosphere was charged with an immense aura he had never encountered before. Vikir couldn't sense mana, vitality, or any life force, only an eerie emptiness. It seemed the knight had long since died, leaving only his shell behind. If this knight had slain the basilisk, he must have been an extraordinarily powerful warrior in life. His hands rested on the pommel and hilt of his sword. With curiosity gleaming in his eyes, Vikir reached toward the roots of the tree. He decided that his first step would be to take the Tree of Spirits and then consult Hugo about what he had discovered. As his hand approached the roots, something strange happened. Vikir froze in place. Behind him, the torches on the wall suddenly ignited with crimson flames. Gradually, all the torches in the chamber lit up. Alarmed, the little spider panicked, her eyes widening in fear. Something felt terribly wrong. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, and an even stranger phenomenon occurred. The knight, who had previously appeared like an empty shell, began to stir. He grasped the hilt of his sword tightly, then rested a hand on the armrest of the throne and stared at the ground. The small spider trembled and hurriedly hid inside Vikir's clothes once again. Despite the danger, Vikir remained calm. He was prepared for this. He knew that nothing would be so easy. The formidable knight drew his sword from the ground and rose to his feet. Vikir kept his guard up, observing silently. Sensing imminent attack, the knight tightened his grip and prepared to strike. As the sword drew closer, Vikir's eyes sparkled with resolve. He knew he had to dodge or face certain death. The knight swung his sword with great force, but Vikir reacted quickly and dodged, causing the blade to strike the ground and shatter into pieces. The knight wasn't your ordinary swordsman. He shifted his grip and unleashed a series of powerful slashes, but Vikir's agility allowed him to avoid most of the attacks. The small spider emerged again, watching the knight with cautious eyes. Vikir remained composed, noting that the attack pattern was dangerously monotonous. The knight, seemingly without free will, charged forward in a series of reckless, senseless movements. As the knight prepared to attack once more, Vikir landed on the ground, a hint of disappointment crossing his face. He had hoped to find a protector of this extraordinary place, but now that hope seemed futile. Drawing his bow, Vikir prepared a mana arrow, his mind swirling with questions. How could this knight fight without mana or vitality? Yet, he knew he couldn't afford to waste time pondering. He released the arrow with determination, aiming to send the knight to another world in a single shot. The mana arrow spun like a bullet, streaking toward the knight. The knight lowered his gaze and fell silent. Then he lifted his head, his eyes suddenly shining with malevolence. The knight employed the first Baskerville technique, swinging his sword with incredible precision and cutting the mana arrow in half. The attack caused a massive explosion of mana, startling Vikir in both surprise and fear. He couldn't believe the knight had just used the first Baskerville technique. Without hesitation, the knight gained momentum and prepared to attack again. The small spider panicked. This wasn't good. Clenching his teeth, Vikir understood that the knight had been hiding his true strength. He urgently shouted at the spider to hide. Recognizing the danger, Vikir summoned his beloved sword, which radiated an intense aura of power. The knight charged toward him, prompting Vikir to adopt a defensive stance. He clenched his fist, causing mana to harden into a crystal-like layer around his sword blade. The knight launched a fierce attack. At that moment, Vikir invoked the 7th Baskerville technique. To his surprise, the knight countered with the 8th Baskerville technique, unleashing a barrage of deadly mana slashes. The speed was so great that Vikir had no time to react, resulting in deep cuts across his body. He cried out in pain. The knight then lowered his gaze toward the ground, but gradually his helmet began to crack. His eyes, shining with rage, focused intently on Vikir. Soon, his helmet shattered, revealing his true face, a man with white hair, his face obscured by bandages. Vikir's eyes widened in alarm. As he sweat and panted heavily, he realized that the knight had used Baskerville's 8th technique, an ambush from hiding. He wondered what the true identity of this knight could be. The knight's eyes glinted as he stared silently at Vikir. The boy was bleeding heavily, gravely wounded. The wind picked up, and the knight revealed himself as Conqueror Baskerville, guardian of the Tomb of Swords. Vikir began to visualize a sword in his mind. He was deeply aware that the Baskerville sword style wasn't merely about slicing or thrusting. It was a savage and destructive technique meant to rip flesh and shatter bones like a predator's fangs. The knight's assault had been so brutal, it nearly tore off Vikir's shoulder. Clutching his wound, he let out a scream of pure agony. Despite the pain, his gaze sharpened, burning with renewed resolve. He wasn't going to fall here. It suddenly became clear to him why the wounds appeared so grotesque. He could hardly believe the knight had used only the 8th technique. The gap between that and his own level shouldn't have been this vast. Even the power of the immortal basilisk he had acquired outside the tower couldn't accelerate his healing enough to counter the devastating injury. In his possession, Vikir held the Beelzebub sword. Its first slot was occupied by the S-rank Madam's venomous legs. The second contained the S-rank basilisk of undying vitality. And in the third slot, he had the A+ ranked Mashizu from Silent Hill. Meanwhile, the knight's eyes locked on Vikir, silently observing him. Smoke rose from Vikir's wound as he stared back, teeth clenched in fury. This was a formidable adversary. The knight then unsheathed his blade and shifted his gaze. An ominous energy radiated from his body. Despite his injury, Vikir stood still, watching closely, struggling to comprehend the source of the knight's overwhelming power. When the knight finally turned around, malice gleamed in his eyes. He was a relic from a time of chaos, when each noble house ruled like sovereign kingdoms. In that dark age, a warrior rose to prominence, the mightiest of the 7 counts who led the Baskerville family to greatness. A man who, after seeking ultimate strength, vanished from the world. His name was Cain Corso La Baskerville. Vikir, catching his breath, forced himself to stand. He panted heavily and asked the knight if he was truly Cain Corso. A gust of wind blew as the knight gave a silent nod. Cain's eyes, filled with interest, studied Vikir. As Vikir's wound began to slowly regenerate, he clenched his fists and introduced himself, Vikir Van Baskerville. Cain appeared mildly surprised. He realized that a son of the Van bloodline, and not of the main L branch, had reached such a formidable level even before adulthood. Vikir looked down, jaw tight, refusing to speak further. Cain also noticed the legendary Beelzebub sword in Vikir's grasp, a weapon long believed lost. He took note of Vikir's regeneration. The fact that he had survived the 8th technique spoke volumes. Cain acknowledged Vikir's potential. But to Vikir, Cain was the true anomaly. At first, Vikir hadn't even been able to comprehend the full essence of the 8th technique. As Cain slowly advanced, a suffocating aura began to emanate from him. Vikir realized that he hadn't sensed Cain's life force until now. The moment Cain revealed his identity, his energy felt like it could peel the skin from Vikir's bones. Images of Cain unleashing the 8th technique flashed through Vikir's mind, a skill so overwhelming that Vikir had been powerless to resist. At that moment, he knew he stood no chance. With one hand still on his wound, Vikir studied Cain intensely. He now understood. This man had created the lurking ambusher technique. Vikir wondered what heights Cain had reached. Cain wrapped both hands around his sword hilt. He was ready to show his true power. With a thunderous crash, he drove the sword into the ground, breaking it apart. Slowly, he began unwrapping the bandages from his face. His eyes dropped to the floor, and he began speaking softly about the emotions he had embraced to master the 7th technique. Vikir watched in shock as the final bandages fell. Cain's face was half-burned, parts of his skull exposed. With unwavering eyes, he explained how he had obtained the 8th technique in a life-or-death battle with the basilisk. And just before entering the tower, pushed to the brink of mortality, he reached the apex. He had surpassed the limits of the 9th level, Swordmaster. Cain had become the Death Knight. A Death Knight, a fallen noble consumed by darkness. A being who once possessed unmatched strength and spirit, now drawing endless mana from the shadow realm beyond death. His power would only end when his body collapsed and his soul faded. His size, origin, and threat level were complete mysteries. Vikir's breath caught in his throat. His eyes trembled with terror. Was this the mythical 9th form? The peak of swordsmanship? Cain observed Vikir quietly. He was a man who had embraced death to seek true mastery. He then looked down and confessed that the lurking ambusher wasn't his invention. He had merely read about it in an old text. Extending his hand, he admitted that the 10th form remained out of reach. To attain it, one must die and return. Though he had died, he had never been resurrected. That was why he remained trapped. A strange energy flared from Cain's exposed skull. He spoke of a tree, a strange one he often imagined, and with a solemn tone, confessed that as a Death Knight, rebirth was impossible. That was why the tower had bound him. Vikir's eyes grew wide with both intrigue and confusion. How could a warrior of Cain's caliber be confined here? What was this place? Cain fell into thought. He admitted that Vikir's ignorance made sense. No one else knew of this place. A torch illuminated the chamber as Cain looked toward him with sadness. This was the tomb of the stab blade, where the first Baskerville's life and death had intersected. Vikir, panting heavily, listened in silence. Cain continued. The cradle where the first Baskerville was born bore the same name, the cradle of the stab blade. And it was here that he met his end. Those worthy enough, guided by fate, would discover this truth. Only a true Baskerville could perish here. The fact that Vikir had arrived meant destiny had led him. Vikir was overwhelmed. With a serious expression, he demanded to know what Cain meant. Cain imagined himself chained upon a throne. He explained that it was the tower itself that had imprisoned him, ensuring he would never escape. Then a door creaked open, letting sunlight flood in. The one opening it was Vikir. The Tomb of Blades had designated Cain as its sentinel, the one tasked with welcoming the true heir of Baskerville. As its guardian, he was meant to guide that individual toward mastering the 10th form. Through the ages, Cain had waited, knowing someone worthy would eventually arrive. That person would be the only one capable of freeing him from his cursed eternity. Vikir's wounds had fully healed. With a calm expression, he asked if he was the chosen one. Cain, hands resting on his sword, let his eyes gleam with quiet acceptance. He believed Vikir could reach the 10th form. But to do so, he would have to die. Cain pulled his sword from the ground. It glowed ominously. He declared that until their battle was resolved, Vikir would not leave. One would kill the other. That was the tower's decree. Rather than feel fear, Vikir's eyes lit up with defiance. Brandishing his sword, he told Cain to stop talking nonsense. Fate was nothing more than an illusion. He only trusted his own will. A surge of energy erupted from Vikir's body. He took a battle stance, prepared to give it his all. He would fight with everything he had to leave this place. Cain remained silent, bracing himself. With a burst of speed, Vikir appeared right in front of Cain. The Death Knight was taken aback. He hadn't expected such speed. His expression hardened as he countered, asking if Vikir was mocking fate. Before Vikir could react, Cain delivered a lightning-fast strike under his jaw. Vikir staggered, eyes aflame. He couldn't believe Cain had attacked with bare hands. Cain wasted no time. He gripped his sword and charged. His voice thundered, asking if Vikir truly believed he could outrun destiny. Vikir reacted just in time, managing to block with Beelzebub, but the sheer force hurled him backward. Catching his breath, he realized the surprise attack wouldn't work. Cain mocked him for hesitating mid-battle. Snapping out of it, Vikir noticed Cain moving like a storm. In the blink of an eye, he was within striking distance again. Cain attacked with precision, but Vikir blocked it. Gritting his teeth, Vikir realized Cain was incredibly fast, and the gap between them was vast. But Vikir refused to yield. He would bridge that gap with the skill he trusted most, one honed over 2 lifetimes. With unwavering eyes, he activated the 4th Baskerville technique. Cain responded by gripping his sword tightly and summoning the 5th technique. His blade glowed with power. Before Vikir could draw breath, Cain unleashed a ferocious slash. The impact was devastating. Vikir screamed, overwhelmed by pain. Yet he pressed on. Gritting his teeth, he surged forward and infused all his mana into his blade. With deadly focus, he launched the 6th technique. Cain didn't dodge. Instead, he met Vikir head-on with the 7th technique. The result was catastrophic. Cain's sword tore through Vikir's chest like a spear of mana. His body crashed into a statue, blood splattering. Struggling, coughing blood, Vikir realized Cain was dodging everything. Cain then charged with full force, pouring mana into his blade. A terrifying power surged. He shouted for Vikir to block it if he could. Despite his wounds, Vikir charged, unleashing the 7th technique. Cain countered with a 9th. The air warped around his blade as he swung. The mana slash collided with Vikir. Pain surged through every fiber of his body as Cain's energy shredded him from the inside. As sunlight filled the chamber, Vikir fell to his knees. Cain stood over him, silent. Vikir's blood stained the ground, his body defeated. Eventually, Vikir's eyes fluttered open. He was floating in a river of blood. Before him, a mysterious door. He had no idea where he was. And that was it for this chapter. Thanks for watching. Please comment Apple to let me know that you have watched till the end. Thanks.